This is Eva Hussein from Polaron Language Services, welcoming you still from my home, but hopefully soon in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be back in the office. We were just having a chat just before we came online with our wonderful guest this morning, Joe Ball, who's the CEO of Switchboard Victoria. Good morning to you, Joe.
Good morning. Good morning.
Let me just give you a very quick introduction and interview the CEO of Switchboard Victoria. And it is a community-based non-for-profit. And essentially it's peer-driven, which means that you provide support to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, gender diverse, intersex, queer, asexual communities. But also the allies, which is a really I don't know whether that's a new concept. Of course, it's not a new concept, but I like, allies, friends, supporters, families, carers. So encompass quite a range of people that you support with 28 people that currently work for the organization. But can I ask you to tell us a bit more about what you do in terms of your sort of daily tasks? Like how do you actually, what does support actually look like?
Sure, thank you. And I always enjoy talking about what we do, so it's a pleasure. So we run 2 helplines. So we're the Victorian partner in the national LGBTIQA+ helpline called Q Life. So that's nationally from 3 p.m. to midnight every single day. And that is a bit, for those who are familiar, it's a bit like a lifeline model, that it's what we call single sessional, that you call up and you speak to whoever answers the phone and you have a one-off exchange with that person. And then we run a second helpline, which is called the Rainbow Door, that we just started in September. And that's got more intensive support attached to it. So it has a bit more of a case management model, and that's open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. every single day, 7 days a week. And most public holidays, just really important to know that. And it has, all our staff who are on the Rainbow Door are family violence trained and are able to respond and recognise family violence and suicidality. So there's, so it has that more intensive support, and we'll call you back. That's one of the services of the Rainbow Door. If you can't get through to us or you call outside of our hours, we'll call you back. Also, we might just call you back to give you more support. So that's sort of understanding the 2 different types of the phone lines. Then we run a service called Out and About, which is an older person's visiting program. So we visit older LGBTI people in their aged care facilities, in residential aged care. Some people know that as nursing homes. We visit them there or in their own home. Sometimes some of those people might be as young as 40, because we know that some people live in residential aged care who are young people. That's not desirable, but that's what happens sometimes people live in homes that are younger. So we'll visit anyone who meets the criteria of living in who's older or lives in a residential aged care facility. And that's a social visit that we do with that person, because we recognise there's huge issues with loneliness in our community, in a lot of older people's communities. And we've been virtually visiting people during COVID-19, because as most people would know that you can't visit people in aged care facilities for most of this year in Victoria. But we're trying to physically visit people again. And that's run by us supporting volunteers to go in and visit people. We also have a dedicated suicide prevention program that goes across all our programs. And that's where we do research, training and support around LGBTIQA+ suicide prevention, what we call intervention and postvention. So after a suicide has taken place. And then we run a program which is called QTPOC, which stands for Queer, Trans, Intersex People of Colour. It's a COLD or a multicultural program to a certain extent. And that's recognising that there is different needs for people who are people of colour within our community, and they can come across in different ways. And at the moment, that program is focusing on international students, which we know is an area of concern, particularly during COVID. And we also focus on asylum seekers. But it has a general kind of outlook of diversity and inclusion for people of colour. So that's who we do from a service overview.
Joe, it's a massive portfolio. I cannot imagine how much work you guys must be doing. And I was commenting just before that I had a really good look at your website, which is amazing, and it's created by your partner. So I did say to say to her that it's a really well designed and structured website with information that's very easy to find. So if she happens to hear this, well done. It's really fantastic. But I was going to ask you a couple of somewhat difficult questions. One is this, that I know that you studied 10 years ago now, I think you graduated maybe. You studied history and gender studies, is that right?
That's correct. And Koori studies, actually.
And, okay.
Which is Aboriginal studies, yeah.
So that's quite an interesting range of topics that you covered. Now, when you did study, what has changed in the last 10 years? If you were to study history now, today, or if anybody considers studying the type of history that you, or topics that you studied, what would we see today compared to 10 years ago? Because, from a, I don't know if I'm an outsider, maybe I can call myself an ally, hopefully I can, but it's I'm somewhat outside of the community, I guess, although I have, like everybody, I have friends that are gay and, bisexual, whatever, lesbian. But the question for me is, am I really correct that things have changed, or are we still struggling with the same things over and over again? Because you did mention suicide, you mentioned mental health issues. It sounds to me like, if anything, they are exacerbated, or is it because it's out in the open now?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. And I'm a really strong believer in history. I mean, I love the study of history because I think, if we don't understand where we've come from, we don't understand where we are. And it is really important to understand social movements and progress and also backward steps. It's really important. Otherwise, we can just sort of get trapped in this moment that we think that the way it is right now is the way it's always been. And of course, it hasn't been. And so one of the things over the last 10 years, there has been heaps of progress. I think that the LGBTIQA plus movement has had, it is an exemplar, I would say, in the progress that it has made compared to other areas of equality, not so much in how far we've come, but in the short period of time. Mm. In my own lifetime, homosexuality was criminal in Australia. When I was in the early part of high school, growing up in Queensland, it was illegal to be homosexual, and the law was unnatural acts against God. That was part of the legislation. In 1945, in Victoria, you could be hung for sodomy, part of the offence. So, if you think about like that kind of a criminal, like a death penalty to criminalisation to, and also we've moved away from, within my own lifetime, people used to get electric shock treatment or lobotomies or like really intensive medical procedures for being homosexual or being transgender. So we've seen that, where we're talking about like the last 25 years, a huge shift to the point where just in the last month, we've seen that, the Premier of the Australian Capital Territory is a gay man who's running, Canberra and the ACT. Like that's like how that has changed. So, and we have, federal politicians on both sides of the House, Liberal and Labor, who identify as gay and are holding ministerials. And so we've had a huge amount of change in a short period of time. However, I think that there's still a long way to go because I think that it's uneven. The change is uneven. That things have gone forward in one ways and backwards in another, and I think it's a highly contested issue, and we saw that around marriage equality. There was people really campaigning quite hard against marriage equality, but what was behind those views was often quite insidious as well. Like some of those views were the same people who would like us to go back to criminalisation, and so I think we haven't quite, I guess, become an evenness where you would say the Australian community is completely unified with the idea that LGBTIQA plus people should be equal in Australia. I think we have a huge, it's quite incredible, within, if you just took, for example, the Catholic Church, you have some Catholics who are gay themselves, leading their congregations, really, really progressive. And then you've got other people who want us to return to a sort of a darker era. And I think that sort of exemplifies where we're at within, it's just a huge divide. And I'd like to see, a lot more evenness, because I know from the work that we do on our helplines is that people tell us that the circumstances within their own families, their schools and their communities on an individual basis can still be quite scarily vindictive and horrible, to the point where people feel like, young people and people of all ages feel like they would rather end their life than live in their identity. And I think, you know, until that we've gotten past that point, we've still got a long way to go.
And Jo, I think I will say that words can hurt and do hurt. I guess we are changing the way we talk about these things as well. And I think in the mainstream, whatever that is, we you know, don't no longer talk about suffering from mental health issues. We talk about having a disability rather than being disabled. And I know that in this space that we're talking about today, there has been a lot of change in how we describe things and how we talk about things. However, they haven't quite made it into other communities, I guess. So there's still a lot of stigma attached to words. But what I wanted to ask you is about the acronym. So currently on your website, it is LGBTIQA+. Can you tell us a bit more about the history of that acronym? What does it stand for, and why does it keep changing? Because I think some people might be a little bit confused even as to why different acronyms are put out there and what they actually stand for.
Yeah, and I think it's like, it's different throughout the world as well. You know, in America, it's GLBT, you know, it starts with G and it doesn't include the I. You know, that's quite... in the UK, still the G ends up being the front. You have a lot of people who still talk about the community as being the gay community.
Right.
That's a bit more universal, maybe overseas. But yeah, we use the acronym LGBTIQA+. And some of the explanation by that is that we put the L first. I think that's, and we do that because in recognition of women's inequality. So L is for lesbian. So we put the L first, like a lot of people do in Australia, to recognise the need for, you know, greater recognition of the double burden, I guess, that lesbians, as you know, discrimination as women and discrimination as lesbians. And so we put the L up first, and then there's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and in the transgender we see trans and gender diverse, which includes people, more and more people in the transgender category alone are quite, there's a lot of in there. There's non-binary, there's so people who identify as neither gender, so not just that they've transitioned to one to another, but they're neither gender. There's that, and then there's intersex, which is, you know, the reason we include that. And for example, they don't include it in America, is the intersex community here in Australia has said, do include us. The intersex leaders and the main organisations have said, we want to be in the acronym. And same with the asexual community, they've asked us to be in there. And asexual is probably one of the least known, and, you know, encourage people to look that up. I won't go into heaps about what that is, because that's its own story. But then we put the plus on the end.
Right.
Plus used to be for HIV positive.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
It used to be, and people, a lot of people recognise, you know, obviously that the overwhelmingly amount of people who died of HIV in the world. Now it's you know, it's people in Africa overwhelmingly, and African communities who are most affected. But in the AIDS pandemic, it was homosexual men. That's changed now. But I think, so that's what it used to be. But what we use the plus for is to say, and more to come, like an open invitation.
Everybody else.
Yeah, and it's going to change. And I know that people say, like, why so many letters? Surely gay or queer, or, you know, don't these encapsulate it? And I guess for us, it's that we listen to the community that we serve and we hear their perspective, like the intersexual and intersex and the asexual, and people want the letters to be in there, and we listen to that, and we include it. And I think that I always say to people that, you know, I think we get hung up on the idea of, like, people saying, why do we have to change all the time? And I say, well, every year your football team changes, and you seem to be at a, you know, this is a bit of a Melbourne reference, but every year your football team changes, and you manage to remember you know, to get across the new players and who's the new captain and who's the coach. And so I think that if you can learn who all the members of your football team are, you can remember a collection of. So for me, it's about intention. If you want to learn, if you want to get on board, then you will get on board and you will learn it. And the other thing is don't get worried if you make a mistake. Just ask a question like you asked me today and say, what letters do you use? Do a little bit of your own research, go on the website. And, you know, I think that if the intention is right, that you are intending to get it right and you're not intending to make fun of, because we know when people are intending to make fun of us, then you're on a winning ticket. So, you know, don't get hung up. Please don't get hung up on the letters. Just ask and research and give it a go.
Because it is all about respect of other humans. I think it's a very basic principle where, you know, when we see people as people, it makes it all much easier. But just asking questions is a little bit hard and a little bit harder, I should say, when it comes to some communities. And again, you know, I don't believe in labels, as, you know, putting people into boxes, but it is true anecdotally, and we know that, and there has been some research that multicultural communities in Australia still have a longer way to go than the mainstream, whatever that is, in being, I guess, more. It's not even about more accepting or whatever. It's about how that education from organisations such as Switchboard Victoria flows into those communities, because we know anecdotally that you know, we heard this, and I know this for a fact, that some interpreters refuse to work with people that they don't consider worthy of being part of the community, or some people might worry that the interpreters might spread rumors or whatever it is. So I think that part of the education you do hasn't quite made it into some sections of the community, which are kind of a little bit isolated because we don't communicate with them as well as we should, perhaps. So I don't know if you wanted to give me a bit of, and our listeners, our viewers, a bit of a story around that, and what efforts you're making to try and bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I think it's really important to say about that this is a two-way responsibility. And I, you know, want to give a shout. Undoubtedly, there is LGBTIQA plus multicultural people listening to us right now. And, you know, I definitely don't see the responsibility as solely on those people within their community. It's all of our responsibility. And we need to recognise that there is racism in the LGBTIQA plus community, and that pushes people away. There's racism in overt ways, and there's racism in less overt ways, like that the leadership is predominantly white across most of the organisations, and you know, and that often the issues that relate to people of multicultural communities are not taken up as the central issues of LGBTIQA plus organisations. So one of the things we do at Switchboard is we have a people of colour reference group that informs our work, because we need to, and that is only of people who make up that people of colour community. And that's because we need to hear from people who these issues directly affect, tell us what they need, not assume what they need. And we also, you know, with the Rainbow Door, you know, one of the really important things we did is we connected it to interpreter services.
Right, yes. At
the front door, up until we'd done the Rainbow Door, there was very little way for people where English as a second language was to access the services. I mean, if you needed to, if your English was not as you weren't able to use a helpline, for example, in English, it was a really huge barrier. And we do have people using the interpreter service for Rainbow Door now, which is another really important reason that interpreters, you know, because that the interpreters do get across these issues. So I think it's a two-way street. And I think that for me, I'm very much interested in the views of, I'm led and guided by people who live in those communities. Like one example is that we know that during the marriage equality campaign, the No campaign has really targeted the Chinese community.
Right.
That was something that happened because they thought, well, if we can get the Chinese community to vote en bloc, no, and that was, you know, thinking of like Chinese Catholics there, that we could sort of, help the no vote win. And the consequence of that was that there is so many people in the Chinese community who are queer, who are LGBTIQA+, and they felt like they would walk in their communities and see these signs written in Mandarin and Cantonese, like demonizing their lives. And I think, for us at Switchboard, we have to really try and stand against that racism. It was a racist attack to sort of go into a specific community and say, we're going to, because a lot of the information was misinformation. Like they were also told the Chinese community that like, if gay marriage gets up, it will mean that this and this will happen. And that just wasn't true, scared like Chinese leaders into this fear campaign. And a lot of it was happening in language. So it wasn't being picked up. But what we did hear about is that, Chinese LGBTIQA+ people just felt so attacked. So I think in that, I guess what I'm trying to say about that is that we need to realize that we need to work really closely with people who are facing that double burden of racism and, homophobia and transphobia and biphobia, and recognize that those issues can work together and cause just devastating consequences in those communities. So that's my long answer.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting what you said. And I think it is all about that intersectionality and kind of, I keep referring to them as mainstream, but it's true that any organisation that provides any service in Australia should think of diversity, because we are very diverse. And you used to work for ABS, so I know you know all about statistics, and I know a little bit that if you're going to deliver any service, that is the first thing you should think about. Who are you excluding? And it's difficult because we have so many priorities, and especially in COVID, but in Victoria in particular, we've seen in the last few months how not thinking those issues through can lead to dire consequences of people's human rights being affected really significantly. So what I wanted to ask you, Jo, is this: what do you think is your biggest achievement? Because I know that your 4th anniversary of being a CEO of Switchboard Victoria is coming up in December. What have you done in that time that you think, wow, that's made a really big difference to people, to the community, to allies, to friends, to families, to everybody?
I think that probably the biggest achievement, I'd say there's sort of 2 things, but in over 4 years, is being able to get Switchboard out to a broader group of people. Like even the fact that we're talking today, that the organisation is more recognised than it was when I started, and that it's seen as the leading organisation that it is. Because when I first started at Switchboard, and I still hear this today, I go out and I talk to community organisations. I talk to community, when I first started, I did the regional and rural roadshow with the Commissioner for Gender and Sexuality. And I travelled to 23 regional towns in Victoria. And over again, people said to me, I wish that I had known about your service when I was out. And like parents saying, I wish that I had known about your service when my child came to me and said they were transgender. And I just heard it over and over again. And it was so heartbreaking because I would hear, and I said, well, when you say, I wish I had known, when was that? And they'd say, oh, it was 10 years ago. And I think, well, we've been around. We were around then. So I really took it on as a mission for myself to realize that I need to get the service more and more out there into the community, because people are telling me it's a fantastic service. I just didn't know about you. And the struggle for us around that is that we have like sort of zero promotional budget, right? We have money to run our services and we fundraise to run our services, but we have very little money, and we can't do billboards, and we can't, advertise like we would like to get it out there, like the same way as sort of Lifeline or the big phone numbers or the big services can do. We just so rely on the community and the broadest sense to actually promote the service. So I think that's one of the things I've really gone out to do, is to promote the service. And I feel like I have achieved so much with that, I think. And it's ongoing, because I still hear that person tell me they didn't know about the service. I would like to feel like that our phone number could be as synonymous as Lifeline. You know, that would be something really important to me, that people felt like they thought, oh, well, there's Lifeline, there's Beyond Blue, there's 1-800 Respect, and there's the Rainbow Door, there's Switchboard, you know, and people could feel like they could choose what service they wanted to use. So I feel like I've made great inroads, but there's always more to do. And I feel like the Rainbow Door is my other sort of greatest achievement, because I feel that it has that more intensive support that I spoke about at the beginning, that I feel very proud of.
And you should. I think these are amazing initiatives. And I think for what it's worth, I think being a smaller organization helps you be more agile and more responsive and more real, if I can put it that way, with all due respect to your Lifelines. And you know, if I go to their website, things like communication is deeply buried into it. You know, we're talking here about multicultural space, whereas your website, and I'm going to continue raving about it actually, it's very intuitive and very easy to use, where, you know, if you're looking for information, you can actually find it. We do have a few minutes for questions, which I will hand over to Andrea in a moment. How can we support you? What can allies, you know, pedestrian people like me do to support you and to help you firstly get that message across, and secondly, maybe it is becoming a member, a donor, or how does that all work?
Absolutely. I think it is that twofold about, you know, follow us on social media and, you know, stay connected with us and promote our service, because you never really know, like when you share a post, or you never really know who needs to hear it. And as I said, you know, we run a family violence service. You never really know who needs to hear it. You never know who's doing it tough, who just needs to get that message every now and then saying, here's a service for you. So I really encourage people to just, you know, that's something you can do for free, really.
Right.
Service. It's just your time to promote our service. So I guess if people are working in an organisation, we would argue that it'd be great if the phone number could be listed beside other, you know, could you put that around? We can send out brochures and posters and stuff to workplaces when we all start to be more back in our workplaces. So the promotion, what can you do to promote the service, is something we ask of people. And then, you know, as I said earlier, we just rely on the donations of people. Like, consider us when you're choosing a charity and you're doing a fundraiser. And remember, like, people often choose the really big names. It's really important to think about different organisations that you can support. The statistics around LGBTIQA plus organisations receive the least amount of donations in Australia compared to any other organisation. And also LGBTI causes are the least funded. So our organisations are the least funded and our causes are the least funded. So sort of consider sometimes that for us, like, I notice that people always choose the big guys, but like $100 for Beyond Blue can be a drop in the ocean. As an example, you know, I'm not having a go.
No.
But $100 for us can be a huge thing. And I think that's, people can consider that. And also, when you raise money for us, you're also sending a message out to your network that you're a supporter of a broader issue, and that you want to get behind a cause, because supporting our organisation isn't, you know, it's not a neutral thing. It's making a position that you think that we deserve equity, and, you know, the health disparities in our community shouldn't be there. Like, in my lifetime, I'd love to see that we weren't, you know, the overrepresented in suicide and family violence. Like, I want those things to go down for every community, but I'd love that, you know, to sort of not be the story we tell about our lives. Is that, so when you support us and do it publicly, I mean, you can do it privately. We've got a Give Now account. Sometimes it's really difficult for people to make public statements, so please don't let that get in the way. If you want to donate to us, you can do it in the Give Now. But you can, when you do it publicly, you're also making a stand, which I think is something worth considering.
And I think, Joe, you've mentioned, you know, everybody from politicians to sports people to actors being more open and embracing their sexuality and their lives and breathing with, you know, full lungs, if I can put it that way. And it's not just about, you know, watching RuPaul Drag Race and saying, you know, my best friends are gay. It's about, although I watch it, you know, don't tell anybody. I'm a secret fan, but it is about, you know, putting your money where your mouth is and supporting people that are, you know, your friends, your allies, your colleagues, and there's so many different ways. And that information is on your website, of course, which is Switchboard Victoria, and we'll put it on our Facebook feed as well. But we do have heaps of questions. So I know we're going a little bit over time, but is that all right if we just ask a few? Over to you, Andrea. Thank you.
I'd love to hear what people are asking.
Okay.
Thank you so much, guys. There's someone who wants to know how many people or professionals are behind Rainbow Door Helpline.
I'm just trying to think the exact amount of staff. I think it is 9. Sorry, I'm just trying to think about exactly what that. So at any given time, we have 2 to 3 helpline workers on and a team leader. And we're currently in the process of trying to up that number because we are currently taking around 200 contacts a week, and we're already stretched to our, you know, like it's quite stretched. We certainly we always welcome contacts, don't be put off by that. But we would like to, it's now been running for 6 weeks. We predict that we would like to sort of double the amount of helpline workers because we think that we'll probably triple the amount of contacts. And I always say that, you know, we can sort of, while people are contacting us, it's something to celebrate, because I think sometimes we can get into this position where we sort of say, oh, so many people are contacting us, that's terrible because they're in distress. But we know that people are in distress regardless, and that people contact us if they need us. So the more people who contact us, I say, you know, that's great, because you're getting the help and the support that you need. And we've been talking to so many parents during COVID, and you know, it's great. We want parents of LGBTIQA plus people, and you know, we welcome that, because for as long as we're supporting the people who are supporting our community, you know, everybody is getting the support they need, and you know, parents don't always know what to do, and they need someone to check in with and say, oh, my child is saying this and that, and I don't know what it means. How can I respond to it? And we welcome those conversations. And you know, we have a diverse range. I can't go into the full makeup of identifying the workers, but I can say that the workers are a diverse group of people from multicultural backgrounds. They are certainly not all European descendants. We deliberately recruited people that are from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So if that's encouraging enough to people, I want to assure you that that is the case.
But of course, it is also about building that capacity, and it's you know, it's like when you know what the demand is, it takes a little time to train people up, to get them in the right position, and have a team that's hopefully going to grow. What other questions do we have, Andrea?
Yes, one more question regarding the in-language support on Rainbow Door that you offer. How does that service work? So, do you offer the support in all languages? Does that include also face-to-face support, or is only online?
It's a helpline, so it is only over the phone, and it's connected through the Department of Health and Human Services interpreter services. So, which, as many of you would know, you know, outsourced to independent providers. Look, we can only provide what interpreter services are out there. And if the person calls up and they express that they want an interpreter service, you know, we go back through we might arrange a different time and try and find them the interpreter service that they need. Of course, there is, I can't remember how many number of different languages there are in Victoria. And because we do take a lot of phone calls from people who are asylum seekers, we can't always find the language, but that's why you can contact, I should say, one of the things we do is you can contact the service through email, because we know that sometimes email can be easier. We use the interpreter service of Google to do it. So people can email us. They can write us a letter. That's just, I guess it's a bit slower because it's relies on postal service. They can text message us. Sometimes that's really good when people have got an easier access to written language. So that's just through a mobile to mobile, and that contact details is all in the rainbow door, or they can call us. So there's a few different ways. That's a longer answer, but I guess we can only provide what interpreter services are out there.
And it's a good answer in that, Jo, it is work in progress. And I wish we had all a magic wand and solved the world's problem, but we can only do that one person at a time. And I think what I wanted to commend you on and the organisation is that leadership and actually pushing the boundaries and having these conversations, because they're not easy. And with multicultural communities, they may be a little bit harder because, as I said, they may not have that education, or there's maybe a bit of stigma. And some of it is, some communities are very progressive. So it just really depends. So we can't really sort of put people into boxes and, label them, which is what Switchboard Victoria is about. It's about the human factor. It's about looking at who's at the end of your service and how you can support them. And it's not a cookie cutter kind of solution. Quite the opposite. I think it depends on what people need and how you can support them through that journey. But it sounds like you have a lot of work ahead of you. So I wanted to hand over to you just for the last few questions, and thank you for staying on, because we have heaps of questions that we can't ask because we've run out of time. But can I get you to comment just on the leadership that you have had to take in taking your organisation into the next level and being more inclusive, even more embracing? And you have expressed some of the challenges that your community experiences, including racism and kind of exclusive nature of things, and that happens everywhere and for everybody. Talk to us about what sort of a leader you are, and I wanted to commend you and thank you so sincerely for being part of this today. And hopefully we can have many conversations to have in the future years or sessions or whatever. But we'll send you the email with all the questions that we've got. Talk to us about leadership and what it means to you.
I think for me, what's really important to recognise is one of the things when I came in to Switchboard is that people had this concept prior to me coming in that we needed to be neutral. And I think neutrality often means that you just agree with the status quo. And when that status quo is inequity, whether from racism or, homophobia, transphobia, you don't want to be neutral on those issues. And I think that's one of the things I brought to the leadership, is to be explicit about what we stand for. And I think that that's what brings people towards us, and that people, that's not to say we won't talk to people who disagree with us, because all the time we do talk to parents who are very unsure of their child's transition or sexuality, and we welcome those difficult conversations. But publicly, we know that we also need to take stands on things so that people can trust us and know what we stand for. And when you're neutral, I think you, for example, like we took a position during the beginning of COVID to say that we were against the anti-Chinese racism.
Right.
Really important to us. When people may have forgotten what happened in the early days is that, people called it the Chinese disease. And people really, there was a lot of really intense racism, and a lot of, Chinese businesses were really affected in the early point. So we really came out against that because we knew that it was really important that we actually stand, make these important issues. And so I think time and time again, we see what's happening out in the world, and that's been my leadership, is to take a stand and to understand the diversity in our community, and that somebody might be a lesbian but there's many different other parts of their identity. And if they feel like their other parts of their identity are ignored or unseen by us, then they don't feel like they can trust us. Like at times we've also come out publicly against Islamophobia. And because we know that many, people in our, we have volunteers, we have members on the board who identify as queer and Muslim. So it's important for them that we made a stance about, condemning Islamophobia, and it's really important that we make those stands so that people see us as that we recognise all parts, and I think of who people are. And I guess so that was a really important part of my leadership about understanding what intersectionality is that people are just many things, and that there's no such thing as neutrality. Neutrality just means that you're quiet in the face of injustice. That's how I saw it. And that means that, not everyone will like you all the time, but people don't like you for being quiet either. So I think for me, it was really important to make Switchboard the progressive organisation that it is. And I think also when you make those stands, it's also a way of saying to the community of like, we have so much in common. Like while we fight against racism, maybe you can see that you should stand with us against our issues. Like I think it's also that allyship, that coalition building that I'm a really big fan of, is that if we're going to make a better world, let's make it a better world for everybody and not at the expense of anybody. And so I guess that's how I'd sort of sum up some of my leadership. And I think the other part of my leadership, if I was to just say one other thing, is that for me is that I listen to the critique all the time. I really try. I think that as a leader, you need to not get yourself into a position where you can't hear the criticism that is out there, because so much the criticism or the critique that people have given me has made me a better person and the organisation a better organisation. Like when people have said to us, you're not including this, or you're not doing this, or you could do this better, is that we must welcome that. We must welcome that. Welcome people speaking up to us, because for as long as people will critique me and offer me their perspective, it means that they want us to change and they want me to be better. The real danger area as a leader is when nobody speaks back to you. That means you become unapproachable, unmovable, and it's dangerous.
Jo, can I just say that you're definitely not neutral, definitely not beige. I think the rainbow colours that you stand for, I guess, even though it's a bit of a, it's an interesting image to have against that beigeness and that neutrality that you spoke of. You're definitely not that. And I sincerely wanted to thank you for your time, because I've learned heaps. I think hopefully people that have listened to this have too. And as we said, there's lots of work to be done, but we have come a long way. So that progress and that change also needs to be recognised. And it is thanks to leaders like you who actually are inclusive, who are good listeners, and who aren't afraid of having difficult conversations, which some of them are. So I wanted to wish you best of luck with Switchboard Victoria, any initiatives that you've got, and people please support, because without that support, all that work and all that leadership will be that much harder. So thank you again. Thank you for spending your morning or now afternoon with us, and we'll see you around, definitely. Thank you so much.
Absolutely a pleasure, and I thank you everyone who's been listening. I really appreciate it. It's a big day. There's a lot of distraction out there with the US election, so I really appreciate that you've chosen to tune into this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jo, and we see you next time whenever we see you. Take care.
Indeed. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrea.